By 1968, the slow, plain Volkswagen Beetle had managed to outsell the entire lineup of American Motors Corporation. Now, Japanese cars were also gaining ground in the US market. On a flight to Detroit that June, AMC's head of manufacturing, Gerald Myers, discussed the need for an economical import fighter with Vice President of Styling, Richard Teague.
Dick Teague was an open-minded, upbeat, highly talented person. He could sketch vehicles that you could look at and say, that's wonderful, it's exciting, and yet it could be built.
He was so desperate for a piece of paper that he saw this perfect on the airplane, and he, of course, had a pen with him.
Grabbing an empty motion sickness bag, Teague sketched the front half of the upcoming AMC Hornet sedan, combined with the chopped rear end of a concept car called the AMX GT. The shape was practical but unique. Hoping the little car would cause lots of trouble for the imports, Teague named it the Gremlin.
The Last Independent Automaker was sponsored in part by Visit Detroit, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Motor City's National Heritage Area, and by the following car clubs, as well as the over 375 individuals and organizations who donated to this project. Thank you.
Despite building a military icon, by the late 60s, the Kaiser Jeep Corporation was struggling. But Roy Chapin Jr., the chairman and CEO of American Motors, had seen Jeep's popularity around the world and its potential at home.
Holy Toledo, what a car!
He knew they could be selling more because if you've got 1,700 Jeep dealers and then you add 3,000 Rambler dealers selling Jeep, your Jeep sales in the United States are going to skyrocket. He realized all that. Had a hard time convincing anybody else.
After Henry Kaiser's death, his family was eager to sell the stagnant Jeep operation. Chapin sent Jerry Myers to investigate its Toledo headquarters in 1969.
The first thing that struck me when I walked in was how many people there were. The assembly lines were just crowded with people. A 3-man job had 10 men on it. A 2-man job had 4 men on it. There were parts all over the place. It was very inefficient. And I went back to American Motors. I said, Roy, I think it's a disaster. You don't want anything to do with it. It's inefficient. It's archaic. It's absurd. My recommendation is forget it. Then they had a board meeting. Roy came out and he said, Jerry, come into my office. We're going to buy Jeep. I said, Roy, you got to be crazy. He said, I got something else to tell you. We're going to put you in charge of it, and you're going to make it work.
The two companies reached a deal that October. Already on strike, union workers at AMC's 2 Kenosha, Wisconsin plants were livid that management had asked for concessions, then spent $70 million buying Jeep.
American Motors had a lot of eggs in one basket. We built the engines, we made the stampings, we had 2 final assembly lines. So a strike by Local 72 could basically bankrupt American Motors. And by the same token, bankrupting American Motors was not going to be such a great thing for us either. So there was a little bit of mutually assured destruction.
The strike dragged on for a record 26 days. But Roy Chapin had already bagged his prize.
Thank God, Mr. Chapin, that you prevailed, because that one decision, I say, is one of the most significant decisions in the automotive business.
Quiet and patrician, the Yale-educated CEO stood in stark contrast to the company's gruff, profane president, William Lüneburg.
It couldn't have been more different, I don't think, because Chapin was very sophisticated and more of a sales and marketing guy. And Lüneburg was just a tough, hard-nosed manufacturing guy who didn't take any crap from anybody.
My stepmother called them the odd couple. because Lunenburg could go walk into a car plant and knock heads, and Dad could go to the banks and say, we need another $1 million tonight. And it worked.
Promoted together in 1967, they had overhauled AMC's finances and image.
I think a lot of the credit for that goes to Chapin for realizing that they needed to capture the baby boom market, and the way to do that was with performance.
1970 brought a deal with Penske Racing and legendary driver Mark Donohue. While new muscle cars lured buyers into showrooms, prototypes were even made for a radical supercar called the AMX3 before management pulled the plug.
We had these grandiose plans, and it just couldn't get the wheels off the ground. By the time the car would have been manufactured and made, it was just too expensive, so they scrapped the project.
Performance cars weren't practical for everyone. Thankfully, new economy models were on the way.
It seems like anything that happens in the United States, a trend is set by California. And the thing was, it was cool to have a foreign car, a little Toyota or Datsun. So California is a trendsetter, and it moved this way.
Since 1950, foreign brands had snowballed from almost nothing to over 10% of the market, primarily with small cars.
Imports became more popular because they became better cars. Gradually, the Japanese and Volkswagen stood out, and it was because the quality was just much better. And the Japanese cars were just nicer. They were smaller, but all of a sudden the Americans didn't care.
AMC's share of the compact car market had slipped, but the attractive new 1970 Hornet would hopefully turn the tide. And by sharing parts with future models, it would save American Motors millions in tooling costs.
Tooling is a broad term for the machines that build the parts of a car. And all of them are very expensive for different reasons. The body dies have to be hand carved out of extremely tough steel. And the machinery, I mean, these are huge presses that can exert 1 million pounds of pressure on a piece of steel. That's expensive. American Motors got around that with the Hornet because they were experts at cutting tooling costs and sharing parts better than anybody else.
The next variation launched on April Fool's Day, 1970.
American Motors introduces the Gremlin.
What is that? The Gremlin? Oh, move over. He's doing it. Wait a minute. Whoa.
It's smaller than any other car made in America, which makes it easier to park and handle.
You like it? Hey! Wow, what's that? It's a Gremlin! Yeah, get in and drive it. Give it a try. It's my car! Wait!
The Gremlin is priced with the imports, and it gets better gas mileage than any other car made in America.
What is this? It's a Gremlin!
And it just could be more fun to drive than any other car made in America.
So whose car is this? It has to be mine!
By sharing the Hornet platform, the Gremlin not only became the first American subcompact car, but it cost just $6 million to develop, versus the $200 million General Motors spent on the upcoming Chevy Vega.
I think American Motors did extremely well. Teague and the group were magicians in taking that design and modifying them and coming up with a completely different look.
Who'd ever dreamed you'd build a car like the Gremlin? I mean, that was very, very unique. You parked in the parking lot, it stood out.
Its low price and quirky styling attracted thousands of new buyers. Unfortunately, the cost of the Gremlin, Hornet, Jeep, and last year's strike landed American Motors in the red for 1970. And trouble was brewing on the assembly line.
People would say, never buy an American Motors car that was built on a Friday.
Because of absenteeism.
And drinking. And across the street was Freddie's Tavern. They knew us all, we knew them. They knew how many beers to set up. You go down and drink your drinks, and they would bring your food to you, and you'd go back.
They had the police out there a lot of times holding traffic up so the herd of people go into these bars.
Yeah.
And I'm not one of those guys. I'm not a drinker. I'm not one of those guys.
I was.
Even when they had topless women.
Drinking and, more recently, drug abuse were affecting the quality of AMC cars.
You're building a consumer product. Some guy out there is working his butt off to buy this thing, and you're doing a sloppy job of it. Not to mention the number of workers that were hurt because they were drunk and they did something stupid.
And the problem didn't stop at the plant gate.
You go into the bathroom, it'd be 10 o'clock in the morning. In there, there'd be like a little fifth, there might be beer cans. I thought, holy cow, they're putting that stuff down? In the summertime, one guy would bring a cooler in. He had pop lined up on the top, beer on the layer below.
I ended up setting up a bar. It was a parts table.
Okay.
And under the table there was a shelf, and I was a floater. So if they didn't need me, I was making drinks.
And I know there was a lot of drinking, but I never knew somebody had an open bar.
Well, it wasn't open. I had a curtain around it. Had a curtain.
The vast majority did their job sober and without fuss, but they were growing frustrated with those who didn't.
I came across a lot of it because I was a steward for a while, but I finally got tired of trying to cover up for somebody else's screw-ups and whatnot.
I wish I had a nickel for every guy's job I did that came in drunk. The boss would say, put him to bed and do his job.
In a rare moment of teamwork, Local 72 and AMC established the industry's first joint drug and alcohol recovery program in 1970.
We really worked closely with management so that if somebody had an underlying alcohol and drug problem and they were willing to admit to that and enter into a treatment program, we were able to save their jobs.
Still, many argued the union was too protective of bad employees.
Well, they got to the point where there was just too many.
That's right. They cut you a lot of slack, and once you went through that program, you come back and you got into it again, you had your chance, buddy, you're gone.
With more high-quality imports on the market, customers who found shoddy workmanship or even empty beer cans in their new AMCs were unlikely to buy another one. Back in Toledo, Jerry Myers brought in Ford racing engineer Roy Lunn to modernize Jeep.
He was just appalled. He said, this is archaic stuff. This is ancient. And they had to really redo the entire Jeep line.
Both the factory and the vehicles were updated with scores of new AMC parts, but the styling stayed.
They considered making it look differently. Then they realized, this is a legend. We're not going to make it look different. We're going to make it look the same, but easier to build and a better vehicle, too.
This year, 9 million of you Americans will buy a car, probably from one of the 3 big car companies, without even considering American Motors. Now that's a shame.
Meanwhile, the ad firm Wells Rich Green helped American Motors launch a direct attack on GM, Ford, and Chrysler for 1971.
If you had to compete with the 3 biggest car companies in America, what would you do?
To answer that question, AMC replaced the old Rebel with the new Matador, combined the Javelin and AMX into one line with wild styling, and launched a new Hornet station wagon, the Sportabout. Marketed heavily to women, it proved an instant hit, outselling the Javelin and Matador combined. All this helped put AMC back in the black for 1971. The big news for 1972, however, wasn't a car. It was a warranty.
The buyer protection plan was the most clearly written automobile warranty there ever was. Instead of having a big booklet with all legal jargon in there that nobody understood, it told everybody, we're going to take care of it, period.
Covering every part except tires for 12 months or 12,000 miles, it did wonders for AMC's reputation.
It wasn't just a warranty that was in the glove box. It was a whole reason to buy the car. A salesman could immediately go into the buyer protection plan and close the deal in a lot of cases.
To back it up, Jerry Myers oversaw hundreds of little quality improvements across AMC products. It paid off when Popular Mechanics magazine declared, "The best put-together cars out of Detroit this year may come out of Wisconsin. That's where American Motors makes them." Things were on a roll, which left Wells Rich Green blindsided when Chapin and Lüneburg fired them for a larger ad firm. But AMC was growing, and they wanted more. To keep buyers interested, marketing VP Bill McNeely spearheaded a series of designer interiors, including a Gucci Sportabout and Pierre Cardin Javelin. For Gremlin, he chose the hottest in youth fashion, Levi's jeans.
My father was saying to me, what is it about these Levi's? Why are they so popular? And I was telling him, oh, Dad, we gotta have Levi's. It was like a big deal.
They gave us cuttings of materials that they use for trousers and all the jackets and everything. Naturally, you can't put them in the vehicles because of flame retardants and wear and all the rest, but we wanted to capture the feel, the coloration, and the details associated with Levi itself. And there was Lois Zolliker, who was the manager at the time of the interior studio. She took a bunch home. We washed them and washed them to get that look that we liked. A little bit of wear, but nothing of any significance, so it gives that nice, soft, feel.
Geraci then found an automotive fabric supplier that could mimic the look. And the 1973 Levi's Gremlin became a sensation.
Gremlin's all-new Levi's blue denim interior trim option. A youthful new look and feel, and it can't be bought at any other dealership. Only Gremlin has it.
When I ultimately went to Chrysler, they said, we really wanted to do the Levi interior also, but sales didn't know if they could sell as many, and the dealers didn't know if it was going to be popular enough, and we didn't know about the pricing, and we didn't know about this, and we didn't know. That's the difference between American Motors and the rest of the industry.
American Motors had become a lovable underdog, thanks to what Roy Chapin called its philosophy of difference.
AMC did more with less. More people had more responsibility. There was no pigeonholing going on. If you could do it and you had the capacity to do it, you did it. And I didn't see that level of commitment and exchange of information and ideas when I got little peeks into Chrysler or Ford or General Motors. We had that a lot because we had to.
To meet the rising demand for AMC cars, the factory went on a hiring spree.
People came from all over to work at American Motors. It's an opportunity that people don't get a lot in this country, to work side by side, to connect as equals and realize that they're here for the same reason. They've got the same hopes, the same dreams that I've got. We're all getting paid the same.
Life in the plant forged friendships over the pride and sometimes disdain for the often grueling work.
My first job was pretty hard. I had to put the brake line on the front of the firewall. When the car was coming down the line, you had to lean over it and put 2 screws in while this thing's going this way. Oh, my legs were killing me for a month. You think you're in good shape? Yeah, that place will wear you out real quick.
And I started out in the motor division, and I was pushing and pulling pistons. You come out with them on a tray, and you put them inside the engine. It was hard work, heavy work, and your hands hurt really bad. I wanted to quit. And then I got moved to a different department.
It was hot. I was welding. It's the middle of summer, and you're bundled up because of those sparks, and I'd be working like crazy just to get maybe a foot and a half ahead so that I could go run, take a drink of water. So I finally, after about a half hour working, I finally got the last weld, ducked underneath the welder, ran to the bubbler, got a drink of water, came back, started because now I'm behind and I'm thirsty again.
There was one job I did. It was an open door with no rubber around it, and that's very sharp. So I put pads on the back of my legs, and then I'd sit on the edge of the car, and I had to lean in and put in the dome light. Everybody else that relieved me for 10 minutes on my breaks had to climb in the car, and they were trying to figure out how did she get all this done and keep up with the line. We all had our own little tricks how to do our jobs.
But for those who could endure, the money was worth it.
And there was quite a few that had gone to college and came back because, you know, the pay and the benefits. You had guys with masters and associate degrees, and I'm working side by side with them, you know, and I'm going like, man, you guys got all this education and you're working here.
When I started in 1973, it was only making about $3.50 an hour. Coming from a job I was making $1.10, I thought I was making all kind of money. And then in '74, I bought a brand new car, brand new Javelin AMX. Paid cash, $3,900.
Once again, AMC's products had struck a chord with the market.
My mother had ordered a Hornet. Me and my father were able to follow it along the line as it was being assembled. Whatever went into that vehicle, you know, I got to see. My dad was a stickler for things being done right. So yeah, when that car came through for Mom, yeah, he was on top of everything there.
However, as sales climbed, pressure at the factory increased.
One of the kind of continuing fights that the union had with the company was to make sure that the line was adequately manned, because it was not unheard of for the company, in order to, try to get a few extra cars out, to jack the line speed up a little bit. But we had access to a stopwatch to see how long it was taking the car to go from point A to point B.
Despite the conflict, not having enough cars to sell was a far better problem than not being able to sell them. By the early 70s, drivers like Mark Donahue, George Fulmer, Shirley Shahan, Wally Booth, and Amos Johnson were racking up wins for American Motors. And thousands more were racing AMCs, though not always legally.
My dad had that Javelin with the 401, and my buddy had a Z28 Camaro, and every time I took my dad's car out, I whooped that Camaro's keister every night. He was never a happy camper every time I beat him. It was too funny.
But America's muscle car obsession had growing consequences.
A lot of them were sold to a lot of young people, and there were a lot of accidents and a lot of deaths and a lot of injuries. And insurance companies had to pay on all that stuff. And the insurance company began to jack up rates on muscle cars. And all of a sudden, teenagers and people in their young 20s couldn't afford the insurance. They could afford the car, they couldn't afford the insurance.
This, combined with rising air pollution, led the government to intervene with new automotive safety and emissions laws.
I don't think most of us really recognized that there was anything wrong. It was only when you saw these pictures looking down on LA where you could barely see the city through all the smog that you realized that this really wasn't the way it was supposed to be.
Everything from bumpers and lights to seatbelts and steering wheels were redesigned. Engines were detuned to reduce toxic emissions, making muscle cars a lot less muscular. But the real death blow came in 1973, when the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, hit the United States with an oil embargo in retaliation for its support of Israel.
One day everything is normal, and the next day I can't get gas for my car. And when I can, it's like 5 times the price it used to be. There were long lines at gas stations. Sometimes somebody else would try to cut in. There would be fist fights, real fist fights in gas lines. And in a few cases, guns were brought out and people were killed over a gallon of gas.
Sales of big cars and powerful engines tumbled.
The average American car probably got somewhere around 12 or 13 miles per gallon of gas, which was pathetic when you think about it, but there was no need to do better than that because nobody ever asked for it. Gas is 30 cents a gallon, who cares? When all of a sudden you couldn't get gas, then it mattered.
I can remember we got a 74 Javelin AMX come in off the transport. I checked it in, 401 4-speed, mellow yellow, pretty well-equipped car, really cool car. And I prepped it and put it right out in front of the dealership. And the general manager came out and says, oh, that's a special order. And I said to him, I says, well, why don't we ever order anything like this? Oh, no one wants these anymore.
74 would be the final year for the Javelin, which couldn't pass the new bumper standards without a costly redesign. The oil crisis only reinforced the decision. It would also be the last year for the Big Ambassador, a name dating back to 1927. On the other hand, small cars were selling like crazy.
The general public always had the impression that, AMC had good fuel-efficient cars. That goes back to the days of Rambler and even before that, Nash. And that actually helped AMC sell a lot of Gremlins and Hornets.
Ironically, American Motors no longer had the most efficient cars.
The Gremlin can get 20 miles per gallon. People were, wow, that's really impressive, Nowadays it wouldn't be, but back then, yeah.
When the embargo ended in March, AMC found itself with record sales, while the big three were facing layoffs. It seemed Roy Chapin's philosophy of difference had been right. But with success came risks.
By 1974, American Motors executives were cocky. They thought they were geniuses and that everything they touched would turn to gold, and all of a sudden they had almost unlimited money that they could do whatever they wanted.
The company went on a spending spree, building a new headquarters and diversifying the business. And while the Hornet and Gremlin were a success, import sales had also grown stronger than ever. But AMC had a radical new design in the works, unlike anything Japan, Germany, or Detroit had to offer, for better or worse.
Thank you for watching episode 3 of The Last Independent Automaker. Be sure to stay tuned for episode 4 when we go into the history of one of AMC's most famous, or infamous, cars ever, the Pacer. And speaking of the Pacer, that's just one of dozens of vehicles in the complete book of AMC cars. With 240 pages of facts, figures, and color photographs, the complete book of AMC cars makes the perfect companion to our documentary. You can order a copy from the link in this video's description, or just visit our website. Again, we'd like to thank all the sponsors who made this documentary possible. Visit Detroit connects curious travelers with the region's iconic heritage and culture, including its notable art, food, festival, music, and museum experiences, and of course, the auto industry. Learn more about what the Detroit metro area has in store for you at visitdetroit.com. The Alfred P. Sloan Foundation aims to increase public understanding and engagement with science. Motor City's National Heritage Area preserves, interprets, and promotes the automotive and labor heritage of the Detroit region. And of course, thanks to all the car clubs around the country who supported our work, as well as the over 375 individuals and organizations who donated to our documentary. If you enjoyed this program and would still like to support us, you can still make a donation. Just leave us a tip on our website. And lastly, I'd like to thank all the people who donated their time, talent, expertise, and even their cars to be a part of the Last Independent Automaker. And of course, thank you very much for watching.